In 2 Corinthians 4, God reveals that Satan is the god of this world, and that he has blinded the minds of them which believe not. Did you know that most in this world today are walking in spiritual darkness? Jesus Christ, however, said that he is the light of this world, and that those who follow him do not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Are you walking in the light?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the program. In recent weeks, many of us have probably learned a lot more than we care to know about sickness and disease and viruses. But one of the things I've tried to emphasize on my radio program is just the basic laws of radiant health, just the importance of eating right and getting occasional exercise, refreshing rest and sleep, and of course getting outside and drawing on the benefits that come from fresh air and sunlight. There was an expert in President Trump's administration that talked about how that the virus, the coronavirus, it dies fastest when it's hit by direct sunlight. And that made me think of this quote I used years ago in a lecture from 15 Million Degrees. It's a book about the sun. It says, not only does sunlight allow us to see, but it made our rocky planet habitable for millions of species of animals and plants. It grows our food, it drives our weather, and it can even be utilized to generate electricity to power modern society. It says sunlight is amazingly versatile, but above all, there is something about sunlight that means it is able to keep us alive. We literally could not live without it. It's essential for our day-to-day living. We couldn't live without it, as that book brings out. Now, I mentioned 7 laws of radiant health. That's something that our church has talked about over the years. This is from the booklet that goes by that name. It says, exposing a good portion of the body to the sun's rays is beneficial. This just talks about the health benefits to getting outdoors and breathing deeply fresh air, and of course the sun rays as well. It says the sun's rays that provide the greatest benefit to health are the ultraviolet rays. These rays aid in the utilization of phosphorus and calcium, and vitamin D is formed primarily through this influence. It says, try to spend time out of doors in the open air and sunshine. So that's just a common sense point, that we benefit physically and even mentally from just getting outdoors. It shows the power of fresh air and sunshine. It's something that we just, I think, instinctively know. You're drawn to it. Here in the UK, if you've had a few days of overcast weather and then the sun comes out, oftentimes you see a lot of people take to the streets, go on their walks, walk their animals or whatever they might do. But they're drawn to that sunlight. Let's begin our study today over in 2 Corinthians and in chapter 4. What I want to do today is to just tie in a spiritual lesson, because as you study through the Bible from cover to cover, you see a lot in there about the sun and about light spiritually. If these are some of the benefits that we receive from sunlight physically, what about spiritual light? Now this book that we study on this program, the Holy Bible, God's inspired word, it talks about this present world that we're living in. It says it's a present evil world in Galatians 1 and verse 4. Several verses, as we'll see even here today with the ones that we read, speak of a world in darkness. A world in darkness. There's some amazing statements, by the way, in this first lesson of our Bible correspondence course. 36 lessons, and you can enroll in this course today. But it just talks about the world today as we know it, as we see it. This is a quote, by the way, from that lesson. The whole world is now in a time of grave crisis and is rapidly approaching a condition of total chaos. We are now in the crisis period at the close of this age. The world does not really know where it's headed, nor does it comprehend the lessons of the past. And isn't that true? This was written years ago for this correspondence lesson. But look at how applicable This instruction is for today. We're living in a world where we really don't know where we're headed. We're coming up to all of these events, unprecedented actions and events, day in and day out. It's a world without direction, and there's a reason for that. Here in 2 Corinthians 4, in verse 4, it says, "In whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them." Here the gospel is likened to a bright light. And God says that the minds of men have been blinded to the light of this glorious gospel. Blinded by the god of this world. That's Satan the devil. He was Lucifer at the beginning of his creation. And that name, it means light bringer. He was to bring light to this earth. But he rebelled against God. He turned to lawlessness. He wanted to put himself even ahead of God. He wanted to put himself first. Vanity. He was motivated by vanity, not by obeying God's laws. So he's the god of this world. Your Bible says that he's blinded the minds of men. Revelation 12, of course, says that he's deceived the whole world, even the world of religion. But staying here in 2 Corinthians, continuing in verse 6, it says, "For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, has shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." So here the Apostle Paul compares spiritual light to what God sent in Genesis 1 when he said, "Let there be light." Of course, there he was talking in the physical sense. And then on day 4, he separated the light from darkness. And here it talks about spiritual light. Spiritual light, the darkness that prevailed before the Spirit of God moved upon the surface of this earth. What a comparison. When God gets involved, when God recreated the earth, then there was light. And when God comes into your life will light up. The Gospels even speak of that. I don't have time to cover all the scriptures that are coming to mind, but notice over here in John, the Gospel of John, we'll go to chapter 1. John 1 and verse 3, it says, "All things were made by him." That's speaking of the one who became Jesus Christ. "And without him was not anything made that was made. In him," speaking of Christ, "in him was life, and the life was the light of men." The light of men. This is in one of Herbert Armstrong's old booklets. He said, "Is it mere coincidence that as the sun brought the light of day from the darkness of night on the 4th day of creation week, Christ brought the light of truth out of the darkness of evil after 4,000 years? In him was light, yet most still loved darkness." We'll see that in a moment in chapter 3 of John. But here is Mr. Armstrong talking about light, the light of God's truth, coming to this world. But men mostly rejected it. Verse 4, or verse 5, it says, "And the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not," or the darkness doesn't overtake it. This light that's shining, that's the meaning there of comprehend. Let me just quote to you from my father's book, The God Family Vision. It says here, "Lucifer, who was the light bringer to this world, turned to darkness. He then used all his powers and energies to bring this world into darkness." I told you a little bit about that history in just a moment ago. But it says his dark influences have prevailed throughout human history. Christ, the light, came right into the midst of it. The darkness did not overtake Jesus Christ's light. So the light came right into the midst of this thick darkness, and the darkness could not overtake Jesus Christ. Verse 6, it continues here. "There was a man sent from God whose name was John." So this refers to John the Baptist. It says, "The same came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but he was sent to bear witness to that light. Here the light, speaking of Christ, is capitalized. The light of the world. And John the Baptist came to declare him, or to proclaim that light, to witness. As it says there, verse 9 continues, that was the true light, which lights every hope, it says, which lights every man that cometh into the world. That was the true light that lights every man that comes into the world. That's how far-reaching this vision is. My father writes in the God Family Vision, every single person who has ever lived will sooner or later have to be lighted by this light, or he has no future. He'll go into darkness forever. There's no other hope, no other way to live, no other light. There's only one light. There will not be any other for all eternity. This is our hope. This is our calling. This is a light that's for every person born into this world. That's coming when God sends his Son back to this earth and establishes the government of God on earth, God's kingdom on earth. Then that light is going to shine forth from all of mankind. Now today, you look at this world today, and it's not like that at all. And John 3, if we continue our study here, explains why. John 3 and verse 19 it says, and this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. You see, that's the great condemnation. When you look at this world today, here the Son of God, he came in the flesh as Jesus Christ just 2,000 years ago. He came as the light, capital L. The light in a very dark, dark world. But as your Bible says there, men loved darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. See, it always gets back to sin, doesn't it? Lawlessness. Following in the steps of Satan the devil, Lucifer, who turned against God in rebellion and sin. And mankind has been following in that same course. Now that's why we're living in a world where it seems there's no direction. We don't know where we're headed. That's why we're living in a world with so much chaos and disorder. And we've certainly seen that in recent months. Verse 19, well, I read that. Look at verse 20. It says, for everyone that doeth evil hates the light, neither comes to the light, lest his deeds be reproved. But he that doeth truth, it says, comes to the light, and his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. So if you're obeying God, then you're just drawn to the light. You're drawn to God and his presence. You're drawn to Jesus Christ and his example. You're drawn to faithful ministers. If you're living in darkness, well, you don't want to have anything to do with that. You want to do your own thing. You want God to stay out of your business. That's what the majority, that's the course that this world is on. And that's why there's so much darkness in this world, spiritually speaking. But in your individual life, God can intervene. He can open your mind, and he can fill your life, your mind, with spiritual light. And think of the health benefits to that, spiritually speaking, to live a life with purpose, to live a life with direction, to know where you're headed, to know that there is hope for this dying world. There is hope for this world enveloped in darkness. And that hope is in the good news of the glorious gospel that Jesus proclaimed when he walked this earth 2,000 years ago. That's the good news of the soon coming kingdom of God on earth. You can study a lot more on that subject in these two books that we'll offer to you here today. This first one, John's Gospel, the love of God. I've gone through a few scriptures here from John's Gospel, and this really takes you into an in-depth study of that gospel that John wrote. And then this one, we'll come to a few verses in Peter, 1st and 2nd Peter in the next segment. But right now, call our operators today and request the epistles of Peter, a living hope. We'll be right back. Let's go ahead and continue our study here in the Gospel of John, this time in John chapter 12. Notice verse 35. Jesus said unto them, "Yet a little while is the light with you." He's speaking of himself. He says, "Walk while you have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walks in darkness knows not where he goes." We all understand this. This is very simple to visualize. If you're walking in darkness, you don't know where you're going. You're going a lot slower, or you're very tentative. You're trying to feel your way around. That's what this world's doing. There's no spiritual light. That's why every man just seems to be doing what seems right in his own eyes. And that's very dangerous. Read Proverbs 14 and verse 12. We're living in the age of Judges 21 and verse 25. We're all just doing what seems right. That's a dangerous course to be on. We have no spiritual light to guide us. In the Psalms, it talks about the Bible being a lamp unto our feet. It helps us to see where we're going. If we don't have that, we're in blindness. We're in darkness. That's what Jesus is talking about here. Verse 36, it says, "While you have light, believe in the light, that you may be the children of light." You've got to believe. You've got to be a doer. Jesus, he said elsewhere, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, but you don't do the things I say?" Continuing, it says, "These things spoke Jesus and departed and did hide himself from them." So he gives them this little lesson about light. Look, you're in the presence of light, and you want to make sure that you believe. And yet look at what the very next verse says, verse 37. "But though he had done so many miracles before them, yet they believed not on him." Well, they just saw all these miracles. What a witness. They were in the presence of the Son of God. He was right there in their midst. And yet they didn't believe. They didn't believe. They didn't follow in his steps. They preferred to live in darkness because their deeds, like John 3 says, their deeds were evil. It's the same with the world today. Let's look at 1 Thessalonians 5 and again see what the Apostle Paul wrote on the subject of light. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 4. It says here, "But you, brethren, are not in darkness, you people of God, true Christians. You're not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. You're not going to be caught unawares. You're not going to be surprised by the return of Jesus Christ. You'll be ready because you believe, because that light of the glorious gospel, it lights up your life. It fills your life." He continues, verse 5, "You are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. We're the children of light." He's just carrying on with what Jesus said in John 12. True Christians, the children of the light. Verse 6, it says, "Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober." And verses 7 and 8 continue, "For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us, who are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for an helmet the hope of salvation." Let us put on this armor. You can read a lot more about that in Ephesians 6. But we're children of the light. We're children of the day. We live in the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, the good news of the coming kingdom of God. That kingdom vision, it fills our lives today. Those of us that have been called out of this world, called out of darkness, called out of spiritual Egypt, on our way to the promised land. Let's look at the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew chapter 5. These are familiar verses here. If you are familiar with some of the statements and the admonitions of Jesus Christ, Matthew 5 and verse 14, he begins by saying, You disciples are the light of the world. Now we've got to make sure that the darkness, it's so thick, that the darkness of this world does not overtake us. If you look at what happened to the worldwide church of God, this history is talked about in Raising the Ruins and Malachi's message to God's church today, but following the death of Herbert Armstrong, look at the thick darkness that set in that church. That church that turned to lawlessness and rebellion, and the lights went out, so to speak. Jesus said, "You disciples, you're the light of the world." Here are the verses together. Verse 14 begins, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it gives light unto all that are in the house." It says, "Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." You see, set an example in this dark and dying world. Let the light shine. Now that takes some energy coming from God, just like it takes energy in the form of electricity to light up the lights in this studio. We have to plug into God. Let this mind be in you, Philippians 2:5. We've got to go to God in prayer and Bible study. We offered the prayer booklet on the last program. That's our lifeline. That's how we fill up our lives with God, praying to God, crying out to God, and then studying His inspired Word. This is what it says in the God Family Vision. Just as it takes energy and power to make an electrical light shine, it takes spiritual energy, the power of God, and real effort to make this spiritual light shine in your life. It takes real effort, spiritual effort, for that light to shine in your life. It takes prayer and Bible study. It takes contact with God. Let's go to the epistle of 2 Peter chapter 1. And we'll just hit a couple more scriptures before we conclude here. A wonderful study. If you want to dig into it further, there's lots and lots of material, lots and lots of verses in the Bible that talk about spiritual light and the health benefits, as I touched on at the top of the program. With the physical, it's just obvious. It's common sense. The benefits that are there. If you just really surround yourself in the warmth and the energy coming from the sun, coming from the light of day. There's obviously balance and moderation. You can't have too much of it, but the health benefits, they're quite obvious. This is 2 Peter 1 and verse 19. It says, "We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that you take heed, as unto a light that shines in a dark place, until the day dawn, and the day star arise in your hearts." This is talking about leading a life that culminates in the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. That's when He's going to bring light to all of mankind, like it says in John 1 and verse 9. Every human being basking in that light, that glory. Over in 1 Peter, just a few pages back, notice what it says here, 1 Peter 2 and verse 9. It says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood and holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of Him who has called you out of darkness." So God has called the true Christians today, the true disciples. He's called us out of the world, out of darkness, into His marvelous light, it says there. Notice what Herbert Armstrong had to say. This is from 1969. "God's not the author of ugliness, but of beauty. Not of unsightliness or drab, colorless, depressing surroundings, but of magnificence, inspiration, culture. Not the source or giver of cheapness, inferiority, but of quality and character." And he says, "Not of darkness, but of light and brilliance." That's what God is the author of. All that is beautiful and lovely and holy and pure, all that's lit up in brilliant light, spiritually speaking. He has a lot of light that He wants to bring into your life, if you'll let Him. if you'll do your part to really go to that source, that energy source in heaven, this will certainly help you in your studies. The Epistles of Peter, A Living Hope, a booklet my father wrote, and then this one too, John's Gospel, The Love of God. Don't forget to enroll in our Bible study correspondence course if you haven't done that already. And of course, our Trumpet magazine is offered freely to subscribers all over the world. If you'd like to subscribe, just contact our operators today and ask for the free material. Thank you for joining us on today's program, and we'll see you next time.